to finally make that declaration. He declared that Jesus was the Son of God. And that more important for that time period and for us today, not only was he the Son of God, but he had come as the Messiah. And that was such a huge proclamation. And now here it is 6 days later, and things are happening again. And it made me think about a memory I have as a child. I grew up in a Wesleyan church that probably that one white little church that you think of. Every time you think of the little white church in the country, that's exactly what this church looked like. It was a little white church with a steeple and a cross on the top, and even had a bell on it. And it was right there on Euclid Drive in Pierre, South Dakota. Now, some of you are saying Pierre. No, it's Pierre. No, it's Pierre. If you're from the state of South Dakota, we call it Pierre, South Dakota. The capital of South Dakota, in fact. Only 10,000 people lived there at the time, if you can imagine. That's half the size of Charleston. And it was a capital.
It's called Dakota.
And it's Dakota. It's
Dakota. The Dakotas.
Yeah, it's in the Dakotas, yes. There's very few people in the Dakotas. And especially in here. It's in the middle of nowhere. But there was this really wonderful Wesleyan church. My parents started going to that church the minute we got into town because the pastor met my parents and said, "Hey, you looking for a church? We have a church." But there was one particular Sunday morning that I have this memory. There was a platform like this and a big podium like this. And, there were 5 of us kids, and we'd be sitting there with Mom and Dad. And I think I sometimes get distracted and don't know exactly what's going on. But all of a sudden, there were 2 men on the platform, and they were glowing, and they were in these white robes, and they had coverings over their head and big old beards. They looked just like the disciples that you see on the flannel graph pictures, right? I knew who they were. They were disciples. And in fact, I found out that one was Peter. Now, I don't know who the other one was, but they were just right there on the platform. And the pastor said, "Come on in, sit down. We have some questions for you." I was fascinated. I can't tell you anything that they said or what questions were asked, but Peter and another disciple were in church Sunday morning. And that memory is still very vivid in my mind. So yesterday I decided to call my mom and say, "Mom, I have this memory. Do you remember this happening?" And I told her all about it, and she said, "No, I don't think I remember that. I suppose if your dad was alive, he might remember it." Well, maybe I'll ask my siblings. Surely one of them will remember it. I was probably 10, so I'm thinking the younger ones may not have remembered it. So I asked my siblings, my older brother in particular, and they all said, "No, we don't remember anything like that." So now I'm trying to think, okay, was that just a dream? Maybe it really didn't happen. But today I want to share with you something that really happened. And it's in Matthew chapter 17. In Matthew 17, if you can imagine what it would be like to have Bible characters just show up on a Sunday morning, what would that be like? In fact, just this last week, WBGL, one of the announcers there was saying, what would be the one question? If you could just ask one question, what would be that one question you would ask God? What would you want to ask Him? And after doing this study, I thought, well, you know what? I talk to God all the time. And He actually answers my questions. I don't always necessarily completely understand the answers to those questions or get the complete answer, but I talk to Him all the time. But you know what? I would really like to sit down with Peter sometime. It would be kind of cool just for him to show up and just sit down and say, "Okay, Peter, how did you handle this?" I see this big transformation between you and at the beginning and how you are today. And it's like, what happened? And that's what's happening here, starting with verse 1. After 6 days, this is 6 days after Peter proclaimed that Jesus was Lord and the Messiah. After 6 days, Jesus took with Him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. There He was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. Right before them, Jesus completely changed. In fact, that word transform in Greek is the same word as metamorphosis. You know that word. That's one of the first science words you learn, right? In school is metamorphosis, when the little squirmy caterpillar goes into a cocoon and comes out a beautiful butterfly, or that slimy little tadpole becomes a frog that jumps around. A complete change, and that's what they're saying, that right before them, Jesus completely changed. His appearance was so different. In fact, the only other time we see that word is the description like that, this radiance that they're describing, was when Moses was up on Mount Sinai and he came down and the people couldn't even look at him because he was so radiant. Or other times were when divine beings appeared before man. Angels. Some say even the Son of God himself appeared before Jesus came to earth. There are times when divine beings are in our presence. And Peter, James, and John saw Jesus this way. Then verse 3, just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. I get that. I mean, really, seriously, if your heroes just showed up on Sunday morning, your biblical heroes were right here, I'd take Moses and Elijah, but I have to admit that I'd really rather talk to the guys from the New Testament. But any of those guys, if they just showed up, I get it. I understand exactly what Peter would do, or I would do too. But just stay. We'll build a house. Don't leave. Stay in her presence. We want to learn from you. I couldn't see any other way to do it myself. But even while he was still speaking, verse 5 says, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my Son, whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. It's the voice of God proclaiming Jesus as his Son. Now there's another time in Scripture when these exact words are being proclaimed. And that's when Jesus was baptized, when John the Baptist baptized him. God proclaimed then these very same words, this is my Son, whom I love, with whom I am well pleased. But when you look back on that, the disciples weren't there. They didn't hear that proclamation. Isn't that kind of neat how God just confirmed what Peter proclaimed last week? He's saying, Peter, you're right. He's my Son. Remember what Jesus said when he made that proclamation to Peter? He said, Peter, you didn't figure that out with your human mind. God revealed that to you. And here is God revealing it again with an audible voice. This is my Son. What I think is really important to see, though, too, there's 3 more words he added to this proclamation. Listen to him. This is more than just, okay, listen to the parables. This is more of a obey him. Obey him. Listen to him. Obey him. In fact, I remember in Tonga, the word for obey and listen were the same word. Exact same word. If you said to your child, listen to me, you were saying, obey me. Exactly. Don't just listen, but obey me. Continue on in verse 7. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said. Don't be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. They weren't going to stay long. There was an important meeting there on that mountain that day when Elijah and Moses and God confirmed who Jesus was. As they were walking down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Again, Jesus is telling them, guys, don't go down there now and talk to the other disciples. This is just between the four of us. Let's not talk about it. Let's not share about it. After I've been raised from the dead, you can share it again. You can tell them about it. There's a reason for this. Peter, James, and John saw God reveal that he truly was the Son of God. And they were looking for this Messiah. Again, remember, they were looking for a Messiah who would save them on earth. That he would come and take over the cruel government that was in controlling them. That he would take charge. And that's not why Jesus came. So he says, don't tell anybody. We keep reading. The disciples asked him, why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? And Jesus replied, to be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. The disciples understood that he was talking about John the Baptist. Again, here's Jesus talking about suffering. Something that Peter didn't want to hear. In fact, he said, stop talking. Don't say that. We don't want to hear about your suffering. Don't even go there. I think probably if Peter had any say in it, he'd say, let's not go to Jerusalem if it's dangerous. Come on. But Jesus is saying, I must go. I must suffer. I must die. And they just can't handle him saying that. That whole idea that Jesus would have to suffer and they too would have to suffer was more than they could handle at this point. Well, now as they get down the mountain, they encounter something else. Verse 14, when they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. Lord, have mercy on my son, he said. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or in the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. You unbelieving and perverse generation, Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here. Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed at that moment. Jesus seems a little frustrated with the disciples at this point, doesn't he? He doesn't necessarily address them personally, but he's talking to the whole crowd there. You unbelieving people, don't you get it? I've been going around healing people and touching people, and don't you get it? And even this man is frustrated that the disciples weren't able to take care of it. So as they're walking down the road then later, the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, why couldn't we drive it out? And he replied, because you have so little faith. Truly, I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can move this mountain. Move it from here to there, and it will. You can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. This is a hard thing because it seems like the disciples do have faith, don't they? They're following Jesus. They're going along with him wherever he's at. But they really, truly are still waiting for that earthly Messiah. They're still thinking that it's all about what happens here on earth. They don't understand that the kingdom of God is more than just earth. It's bigger. And Jesus knows that their faith is not strong enough to really believe that they will be healed. I have to admit, I don't even really understand all of that. How does all that work? When you say to someone, be healed in Jesus' name, and you have that complete faith and it happens. I hear testimony after testimony of people who see these kind of things happen, and then other people who still have strong faith and it doesn't happen. And yet we know everyone will die someday. I just keep coming back to the fact that the most important healing that all of us can have is the healing from our sin. And I don't know that the disciples really got that yet. They hadn't figured it out. This man knew that Jesus was very important, and he called him Lord. And he had said to him, "Have mercy on my son." He knew his son didn't deserve or wasn't any more special than anybody else's child, but he's crying out for mercy for him. They just needed to have more faith. And then it's just like he's kind of reminding them that, again, guys, this is not why I came. It wasn't just to set up my kingdom here yet. There's something else I have to do first. And so in verse 22, he says, when they came together in Galilee, he said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered to the hands of men. They will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised to life." And the disciples were filled with grief. Today when we hear that story, do you feel grief? For me, it's a rejoicing, because I know it happened just as he said it was going to happen. He did suffer. He did die. He was in the tomb for 3 days, but he was raised to life. And because of him, we have new life today. Well, I'm going to go through the whole chapter. At the end of the chapter, it's kind of like, okay, we've gone from the mountaintop experience of seeing Jesus in lights and brights, and Moses and Elijah are there, and all this excitement, to talking about ordinary things like taxes. So let's go to verse 24. After Jesus and his disciples arrived to Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" "Yes, he does," he replied. Now, it seems that Peter is making an assumption, because when Peter came to the house, Jesus was the first to speak. "What do you think, Simon?" he asked. "From whom did the kings of the earth collect duties and taxes? From their own children or from others?" "From others," Peter answered. "Then the children are exempt," Jesus said to him. "But so that they may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find 4 drachma coins. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours." What this is all about is, back in the Old Testament, it was established that men who were 20 years and older would have to pay a tax every year of 2 drachmas. And it was collected every year. And here's the guy out there collecting the tax, and Jesus and his disciples must have walked right past and didn't pay anything. And Peter just assumed that he paid it, but he hadn't. And it's one of those things that Jesus doesn't really feel like he needs to pay it, because his Father owns the temple. His Father's in charge of the temple, so why should he have to pay? But so as not to offend, he said, let's pay it. And I thought that's kind of interesting. So how does that relate to us today? Well, do we ever have to pay taxes that we don't feel are fair to us?
Sure.
Yeah. And I'm not even just talking about government taxes. Sometimes we say, oh, no, that money's going places I don't like it to go, and I don't want to pay it. But we do, right? But even here in the church, we're part of a denomination, right? I might get in trouble, so if somebody calls me, you'll know what happened. But we do pay a certain percentage to the denomination, and sometimes that's a little frustrating, isn't it? Like, we'd rather keep that money right here, and we'd like to spend it the way we want, right? But Jesus is setting the example here. He's saying, just pay it. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of the needs that you have as a church. I'll supply your every need. I've found that true about everything in my life. As long as I give what goes to God first, He is always taking care of every other tax or bill or whatever it is that I have. He supplies. He takes care of me. So he's just, I think, kind of giving a little, oh, guys, this everyday life stuff too. Yeah, there's huge things like boys being released from demons, but everyday stuff, I'm going to take care of that too. It would really be nice to just stay on the mountaintop, wouldn't it? I remember going to church camp as a kid and loving church camp. The speakers were so awesome. They were so much better than the preacher back home because he understood young people, and it was so cool. And it was so fun to have these girls in my dorm who were all Christian girls, and we liked boys, and we talked about boys, but we were all looking for the same thing. We were looking for godly men, and it wasn't like that back home in school. And I just wanted to stay at camp. And it didn't take long to get on that bus and go all the way back home to my house after camp to find out that there were still those crummy old taxes and bothersome things in life that I didn't want to have to deal with. And there was death, there was heartache, there was sickness, there was fighting, there was things on the news I didn't like, just like Peter and James and John found after they got off the mountain. We're not called to stay at the mountain. We're not called to sit and listen to Elijah and Moses. We're called to trust God, no matter what. We're called to be in the world with all of its troubles. And I really believe that that's the lesson that Peter learned that day. He got to see that Jesus truly was his Messiah. And we're not even done with Peter yet. It's coming. In fact, as I keep going through the scriptures, I'm going to skip over a couple chapters, and we're going to go to chapter 26. Because this is the one we know about that's coming, that foretelling of what's going to happen with Peter. And we don't like this part of his life in this story. But in chapter 26, starting with, I'm going to start actually with verse 20. This is the night of the Passover, and they are in Jerusalem now. They've arrived. And the 12 disciples are all there with Jesus to celebrate the Passover together. And Jesus is sitting there, reclining at the table, and this is what he said. I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. They were very sad and began to say to him, one after the other, surely not I, surely not I, surely not I. Jesus replied, the one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me, and the Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born. Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, surely not I, Rabbi. Even he denied it. And Jesus said, yes, it is you. And while they were eating, Jesus took the bread, gave thanks and broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat. This is my body. Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and offered it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom. And they sang a hymn, and they went to the Mount of Olives. Well, they did take that cup together with Jesus that day. But it's not too much longer when Jesus says to Peter, Peter says, even if all fall away on account of you, I will never. And Jesus says, I tell you the truth, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times.